We're looking for questions to reveal the presenters of the show to you, that is to say, Beryl and myself. And we're asking for questions to be sent in for us to answer. It can be on anything. Send it to berylandpete.com and make sure you're subscribed, and then leave a comment on one of the shows, and we will be able to pick up the question, or simply email flameccr@gmail.com. It could be a question on anything. Could be a personal question about Beryl or myself. Could be something about how the show is run and that sort of thing. It could be a problem in your life that you'd like a comment from a Christian worldview point of view on, and of course our answers are guaranteed 100% correct. There's a famous podcaster, Andrew Claven, who says when people send in questions, it's 100% correct, and that they will change your life, but maybe not for the better. That's his line, so I was just borrowing from him. Now, we've got some questions that have already been sent in, which we're going to put to you. They're just conversation starters for us, and we each can have a go at 3 questions. So I'll read out the questions, and then we'll have a go. If you'd like to go first with the first one, it's a question that lots of people are asked. It's one of those questions that in the nerd world, which I sometimes inhabit as a fan of things like Marvel and that sort of thing, what superpower do you wish you could have? The superpower here is like Superman or Spider-Man. If you were a superhero and had those powers, what superpower would you have if you could have one?
I'd like the superpower to be able to be in any part of the world at any one time.
Right, okay, yes. You just instantly appear there.
Yes.
In quantum physics, you're a bit like an electron, which can appear instantly in a different position. Why? Why do you want to be able to? Is it just transport costs?
I have visited quite a number of places in the world. I'm not envious necessarily, but there are places I would have quite liked to have gone if I were younger. But if I were able to do that with a superpower now, because as you get older, you get less confident about your ability to manage yourself.
Yes.
Because of various situations in the world. For example, I wouldn't go to Russia now.
Okay.
Although perhaps I might have gone to Russia when I was younger.
Can I ask Beryl a question?
There's a follow-up question here. What is your question?
Do you want to be in those places so that you can see, look at, sample the scenery, hear the people? Or do you want to be in those places so that they can benefit from your presence in those places?
I wouldn't credit myself as being a benefit, particularly to anybody.
Yes.
No, just to be able to observe them and to go to places which the television doesn't necessarily cover.
But the television does actually cover a tremendous amount.
Oh, it does.
You often comment that you're quite happy sat watching on the television. If I sort of say, well, let's see if we can go to somewhere, Beryl will often say, I'm a lot happier. I mean, take, for example, the whole of the funeral. You got views at a funeral that had I taken you to London, you would have never have got. We watch great train journeys of the world. You see and you travel on trains that we would never, ever be able to do practically or financially. So actually, television is your doorway, but perhaps not enough.
There's an interesting point here that perhaps the reason for thinking television is better is that travel is very inconvenient and annoying. And then you can't be anywhere. Like in the funeral, there was a view on television from the very top of Westminster Abbey. But if you could just instantly be there, just for a moment, and then as soon as you felt unsafe, like you were falling, you'd be instantly somewhere else, then it'd be fine, wouldn't it?
That would be the kind of superpower.
You've removed that issue. But it's interesting that you're using this sort of like, you know how superheroes have a name? People may not get this illusion, it just occurred to me. You know, like Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man.
Yes.
Clark Kent becomes Superman. In your case, Beryl Poldham becomes Judith Chalmers. Judith Chalmers, presenter of a holiday programme on BBC television. My answer to that, what superpower do you wish you could have, is from one of the superheroes. I found that I just have a natural power of it. When I was a schoolboy, I went to visit one of my friends. So I go round to his house, and there's a gateway to the back garden. And he decided it'd be a very funny idea to pour water out a window on the side. Right? And also to use a hose to spray that area. For whatever reason, I went through the front door instead, appeared on the other side where the hose was, And then, what are you doing? Holding the hose. So I had like what is called in Spider-Man comics, Spidey sense. For some reason, in the recent films, they deliberately don't call it Spidey sense. They call it the Peter tingle, which is a weird thing to say, just as a joke. It's such a well-known phrase to people. So I would like Spidey sense. And in Spidey sense, what you do is you simply know when something dangerous is going to happen. Because I think that would be just so useful. You know, driving, you know if there's someone's going to step out or a car's going to crash into you. Be able to walk around with impunity around the world because I'd know when something dangerous was going to happen. And also, as long as I don't have that tingle, my name is, of course, Peter, so I can call it a Peter tingle, I suppose. As long as that's not there, you know that all is well. So it's just reassuring as well. I noticed that neither of us have said we want to do heroic type things with these superpowers. Okay, let's go on to number 2, which is related to your superpower.
Yes.
And that is, where would you go on vacation if there were no budget? Cost is not a problem. Where would you go in the world?
Switzerland.
Well, very sudden answer, yes. Why Switzerland?
Because Switzerland is very expensive. They even charge you to travel on their motorways and certain roads. And whenever we've been in that direction, we've always sort of circled round Switzerland to avoid paying the extra amount of money on their roads and having to get a special pass to be able to do so. So that's where I'd be, because Switzerland is a beautiful country with mountains and lakes and absolutely super scenery.
Interesting, yes. I have to say, I'm not particularly interested in travelling.
No.
So if you say, where would I go on vacation if there were no budget? I would maybe go and stay in Buckingham Palace or somewhere like that. Go and stay at a place with nice grounds, so a nice place where I can enjoy the place that I'm in. You know, maybe a hotel up in the mountains somewhere in Britain. I don't particularly want to travel, never interested me. But having nice food and a warm place to sleep is always very important. So that's what I would do. But what I would do, the key thing about having no budget, is I'd have a long holiday. Maybe I'll do it for a year.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that's where the no budget comes.
I hear that Balmoral is becoming available.
Yeah, the recent document isn't using it anymore, so maybe I'll move in. That's a good idea.
Balmoral would be one of the last places I would choose because all the furniture is old-fashioned. I don't like heritage stuff.
Oh, right.
I'm all for the Swedish Scandi line.
To me, as long as it's comfortable, I'm all right. Our final question of the 3 sent in. So if you've got any questions you would like us to answer, please send them into the show. That is berylandpete.com. You can get through to us, or flameccr@gmail.com. A third and final question. If you could travel back in time, Beryl, what decade would you choose to live in instead of the current decade?
That's interesting. The decade I would choose to go back in my life would be different from the decade I would choose in time.
Oh, so, well, give 2 answers then.
I think I would choose to go back to my 40s if I were to choose the decade of my life, because there I would be old enough to have some authority, but young enough to still enjoy it.
Oh, right, okay, yes. But what about if you were transported to another decade in history?
I think I'd go back to the 60s.
Why the 60s? Is it the fashion? Is it the music? Is it the culture of the times? Is it the sexual revolution?
No, not
what is it?
Not the culture, although the culture was better than in the 50s. The 50s was very didactic.
Yes, austere time in the 50s.
Yes, that's right. We didn't have television. I was still at school, and I didn't enjoy school, really.
Yes. If you could go back there, I guess you could go as you are now to the 60s.
60s. Yes, I think I'd probably do better. But I liked the 60s because I was in my 20s. It was a time to enjoy my freedom, to be able to make decisions for myself, and to also experience freedom of authority, that I could say what I wanted, how I wanted, when I liked. I was given the respect of my age, let's say.
Can I ask Beryl a question? Married in 1966. So are you talking about going back to the early part of your 60s before marriage, when you had perfect freedom, or the latter part of the 60s when you were married and your freedom might have been curtailed?
No. I think, as we were talking earlier in this programme, it is no freedom at all to be single.
Right, yeah.
And, of course, I experienced that in the first years of the 60s. And I experienced more freedom having found someone who I wanted to marry.
Yes. Now, the question applied to me, if I could travel back in time, what decade would I choose to live in? Now, the ones I've already experienced, I've experienced them. So now I've got this opportunity. I think I'd want to go back further than my life because I've already been in them. I could say, well, I'd like to go back to the 18th century and hear some preaching by the great preachers of that time, Wesley and Whitfield. Or I could think, well, I'll go back in time even earlier and go back to biblical times and see Christ growing up. Or I could go back to 30 AD when Jesus died on the cross, and then I'd see maybe the 50s AD and hear Paul, the Apostle Paul, preaching.
But perhaps you'd have also been persecuted.
This is the problem, isn't it? It's when you think of yourself in that time, you don't think of yourself as one of the poor peasants living a drudgery of a life. You're going to be one of the kings or the people with plenty of money who could travel around. In fact, the times before our lifetime, even going back a few years, medical treatment was pretty bad compared with today.
Yes,
so,
indeed.
And if you're not wealthy, there are plenty of other things you can die of as well. The question doesn't say you can go back in time and be extremely wealthy in that time.
No, it didn't.
So I just have to go back in that time. But I think of them all, because I'm a fan of his, I think I would like to go back to the 50s, and I'd like to experience the early ministry of Billy Graham coming over in 1954. And so maybe in London in the 50s. Now, I know it's going to be a difficult time, as you say, austere time. You're going to have to put up with poor food and all that sort of thing. But, this is why I'm such an unworldly and pious individual, Beryl. I would be fascinated to live through that change in the 50s when Billy Graham and the British Church were responding after the Second World War, and the answer came in the gospel of Christ. So I just spend a bit of time there. What was it like?
I loved my church. My church provided me with a really special growing up. My parents were church people, and they were good parents to me. And I just said the other day to Norman that so many people during today are really poor and having a struggle with finding food to eat and places to live. Even though my dad was a milkman, he was receiving a wage, he wasn't unemployed, but my dad managed to contract people to build him a house. We had a lovely house. We always had food to eat, even though he was a milkman.
Yes. Well, that's, again, a topic for another day, maybe. But how it is that we earn so much less now. We have less money at our disposal. Why is it that in marriages, in almost all cases, both have to work? What's happened? It used to be that only one had to work, and the salary was enough to cover it. With all the advances in time saving and economy from the various devices that help us run our lives these days, well, why is it that we're paid so much less than your dad as a milkman could afford
and my
more?
mum didn't work either.
No, so maybe the 50s weren't so bad after all. I'll find out when I go there. That's if these questions do come true.